Hello, my friends. I'm so happy to be with you today. In honor of Father's Day, we will be reposting one of our favorite episodes with Alex Zavala. He leads the platform, the NICU Dad. He is also an incredible member of our Parent Advisory Council. Alex just isn't a NICU dad. He's a mentor, a change maker, an advocate for family-centered care. Through his platform, the NICU Dad, Alex supports and uplifts fathers navigating one of the most difficult and emotional journeys imaginable. He's also the host of the NICU Dad podcast, a space that's dedicated to telling the untold stories of dads who walk the NICU path. During my time as a child life specialist in the NICU, I witnessed firsthand just how deeply families are impacted, not just by the medical challenges, but by the emotional weight of it all. I was always searching for ways to find comfort and understanding for these families, but no one understands it like another NICU family. And that's why Alex's story and his platform are so important. When we create space for NICU dads, we give them the opportunity to feel seen and to share and connect with one another. Their perspectives matter. They bring depth, strength, and honesty to some of the most challenging times of their lives. They carry the invisible load, emotionally, mentally, physically, as they support their partners, advocate for their babies, and advocate outside of the hospital walls. That's why we're so excited to highlight Alex's newest initiative, the Built for This NICU Dad Push-Up Challenge. This challenge is more than just a fitness goal. It's a movement to recognize the resilience, grit, and unseen strength of NICU dads everywhere. Here's how it works. If you were or are a current NICU dad, commit to doing 100 push-ups a day for the number of days your baby was in the NICU. I see some of your eyes getting wide. I know that many dads have spent many days, weeks, and even months in the NICU, but committing to doing this push-up challenge will not only bring you more strength, but it will connect you with other dads who are doing the same initiative. If you want, you can share your journey on social media. You can nominate other NICU dads, moms, nurses, child life specialists, family members, and friends. Use the hashtag musclesandmiracles, hashtag pushwithpurpose, and hashtag the NICU Dad Push-Up Challenge. Whether you're a NICU dad, a healthcare professional, or someone who just loves a family that's experienced the NICU, you can join this challenge too. Push with purpose. It's a way for us to stand together and raise awareness and to remind NICU dads and families that they're not alone. They are built for this. Let's do this together, one push-up at a time, one story at a time. Let's build a stronger, more compassionate NICU community.
You're listening to episode 144, Alex's Story, the NICU Dad Perspective. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Child Life on Call. This podcast is a safe place for parents to share their stories about what it's like to have a child that has a medical experience, diagnosis, disease, and or everything in between. We know there's power in sharing stories, and that power multiplies when you can listen to other parents who have walked a similar path to yours. Giving and getting advice is great, but hearing how another parent navigates the complexities and nuances of healthcare is even better. As a child life specialist, my role is to support, validate, and provide emotionally safe spaces for kids and their families, and I am so honored to be on this journey with you. In addition to parent stories, we sprinkle in some expert episodes every now and again that have content for both parents and professionals in the field of healthcare, all with the mission to empower parents to be confident advocates and partners with the care team during healthcare experiences. We're so glad you're here. Hello, my friends. We have another dad on the podcast today. If this is your first time joining us, hi, I'm Katie Taylor. I'm a certified child life specialist, and we have been doing the Child Life On Call podcast since 2017, which is just bananas. And I get asked the question a lot, who is this podcast for? And so just let me clarify, if you're listening, it's for you. So it's for parents of children that have had an illness or do have an illness or medical condition or rare disease or hospitalization or surgery, or any of the things that have to do with the healthcare experience. But this is also for those professionals who support them, because we learn how to do our job better when we listen to the parent. So we are supporting you, we are learning from you, but this is also for parents to help them feel less alone and less isolated. And our guest, Alex, today does just that. He saw a need for NICU dad stories to be out there. And he speaks so openly about the beginning of their phase in becoming a NICU dad and what it was like for him and the trauma that he experienced. And I think it's an important perspective. And so I'm just so glad that he's here today. He's also host of the NICU Dad Discussion, which is a Hand to Hold podcast. I'm a huge fan of Hand to Hold, and I'm just so glad that he is here today. So without further ado, let's get started with my conversation with Alex.
Before we jump into the episode, I wanted to let you guys know that if you are a parent, a child life specialist, or professional working with children, you're going to want the hospital or physician's office or urgent care that you take your kids to have the Child Life On Call app. It is an evidence-based tool designed to empower children and families during medical experiences. And 100% of the child life specialists who have used this app believe that it can help with expanding child life's reach beyond the bedside. And 100% of child life specialists believe it helps parents feel more empowered in their child's care. Learn how to get the Child Life On Call app for your facility or doctor's office by going to childlifeoncall.com/partners.
I am Alex Zavala, and I am a father to two daughters who were both born premature. We live here in the Austin, Texas area, and my oldest, my stepdaughter, who is now 18, was born at 30 weeks, and she weighed 3 pounds, 5 ounces. And my youngest, who is now 9, was born at 27 weeks, and she weighed 2 pounds, 5 ounces. And with her, we were at Adult Children's NICU for 67 days.
Wow. It's those like numbers don't leave you ever when thinking about 67 days. And I'm sure at the time that felt like years and may even still to you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned that, but yeah, those numbers are just burned into you.
Yeah.
It's insane on how you always have to say, oh, 27 weeks and she weighed this much, but it's just, yeah, you don't forget it.
Yeah. Well, I'm so grateful that you're here for a number of reasons. Of course, we just found out we're neighbors, so we'll have to get together. But that also
Absolutely.
I've had a few dads on the podcast before. I think you may be number 5 or 6 out of 144 is what your number is. So I'm always interested in your really unique perspective as the dad and the critical role that you play in the family. And I've worked in a NICU before, and man, dads have a really challenging job top to bottom and are never off. Right. And so I'm just so interested in learning from you. And would you mind talking a little bit about the time leading up to finding out that, whether Mia or Emerson, whoever you want to talk about first, might be born early, or was it a surprise? How did that work?
So, well, first off, you even having 5 dads is incredible. 4 or 5 dads. Normally what we see, and that's part of the reason why I do what I do, is you're lucky to have one dad or
Yeah.
one episode of anything. And that's kind of what we want to bring attention to. But for me, on my end, my wife, my wife was pregnant, and, we were a high risk pregnancy with Emerson, who's our youngest. And we were high risk because Mia, of course, was born at 30 weeks. So going into that pregnancy, once we found out that we were pregnant, we started seeing the specialist immediately, right off the bat. We started doing everything that we could to go full term. And so it was a different pregnancy, but everything was going great. We always joke about us having more pictures of our baby in the womb with all the sonograms that we took, that we have more pictures than most people do after their baby's born. We were just going to the doctors all the time. And like I said, everything was going great. We really were doing everything we could possible. I was just one of those guys that, that I tried to make sure that my wife was eating as healthy as she could and that we were just not taking any risk at all. And there was such a seriousness to it. And, like an example is we were having to do shots. And so I was actually having to give my wife injections to try to help and make sure that we went full term. And that's a whole story within itself. I
I'm
mean,
sure.
and it was an experience, and oh my gosh, there were problems, and it wasn't
Oh,
a fun time,
has
that's
she
for sure.
forgiven you?
I, I try not to bring it up or ever talk about it again. I mean, I thought I was doing a great job, and then later on watched a couple of videos and was like, oh, okay, I was not supposed to do it that way, and now she has this giant red mark, and yeah, it was a whole ordeal.
Oh
But
man.
but that was kind of the tone of the pregnancy. And so still going into, with everything, we hit week 27, and right at 27 weeks, we go into the doctor and everything's still great. They do, I believe it's called an FFN test. It's a test that they do where they test the proteins, and if your tests come back negative, then there's a 2 week window of you being good. You're not going to have a baby in that 2 weeks. If the test comes back positive, you're most likely going to have a baby within the next 2 weeks. Well, they perform the test and we get a negative. So our doctor tells us, hey, if you want to travel or something, go ahead, because we have a 2 week window. After that 2 weeks, you're not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And so we're like, okay, this was a Thursday. And of course, we didn't really travel. I think we went to San Antonio for my mom's birthday that weekend. But that Sunday, we went and we registered for our baby shower that was going to be coming up. So we went to the store that Sunday, and school had just ended, and we were going into our summer. It was June, June 9th, I believe, that we went and registered. And that following day, my wife went to work that morning. I dropped Mia off at my mom's house, our oldest, and she was going to stay with grandma real quick while I went and did a couple of jobs, and then we were going to spend the day, swimming, enjoying our summer. Well, I dropped her off, and I was about 45 minutes away, and I got a call at 9 a.m., and it was my wife calling. She was hysterical, and I couldn't really make out what she was saying, but the main part that I made out was that her water broke. And so I couldn't believe it. You know, I thought we lost our baby. I thought, pregnancy's over. This 27 weeks, barely 27 weeks. Here we are. Like this is. I can't believe this is happening, and that really is where the nightmare started. And she was hysterical. The phone. I couldn't understand what she was saying, and the phone went dead, and I got a call back, and it was one of our family friends who's a coworker of hers, and she's like, Alex, Jen's water broke. An ambulance is on its way, and they're going to take her to the hospital.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, oh my God. So, like I said, I was about 30, 45 minutes away. I made it to the hospital in about 10 minutes.
Mm.
And, you know, we're talking about dads and the perspective and that phone call is usually what starts everything. And I guess, to bring to light is almost always it starts with this phone call that comes out of nowhere. And you just get thrust into this nightmare where day was going by fine. And out of nowhere, you get this phone call that one, your baby might die. And then you're usually, I mean, I'm by myself far away. And then I have to make this drive where I'm in this car blowing down the highway. And I always want people to understand what that car ride is like. You are in the absolute worst position you could be in. You think your whole world is ending, and you're praying and you're making all kinds of deals with
Mm,
whoever, and just please don't let me lose my family.
yeah.
And the severity of that is like none other. I usually can't talk about this without crying, and it probably will happen. I don't know, but I'm doing okay right now.
Mm,
But it's because of that moment, and every time you talk about it, you get taken into that moment, and it doesn't go away. Just like we talked about the weights getting burned in on
yeah.
you,
Yeah.
those moments get burned in on you too, and they don't go away. So just thinking about that car ride, it's huge. And so here I come in. The whole time I'm praying, just please, don't let us lose our baby. And, just please, 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 I'm sorry for everything I've ever done,
Yeah. Yeah.
that whole situation. And, I come in, it's just like the movies, car comes screeching into the parking lot, and I come out and I'm running into the hospital. And, I'm just like, my wife's in here, they called me, where do I go? And they send me to labor and delivery, and I, finally find the room, and I bust open the door, and there she is, surrounded by all these doctors and nurses, and it was just a crazy scene. I'll never forget it. Just her looking at me, and just with the most scared eyes I've ever seen, and me just not knowing what's going on. Just this whirlwind that you're in. And also too, now, that switch goes off when that phone call comes in, but things just seem to escalate, and you just, the nightmare gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And, but you're having to stay stronger and stronger. It's so hard to describe, and it's really unimaginable because, once she looked at me that way with that face, I knew, okay, I have to hold it together.
Yeah.
And, but I'm also more scared than I've ever been in my life. And, and so the whole time you're trying to take in information, you're trying to hold on to some sort of reality, and then you're trying to be strong, and you're trying to also be a leader, and it's so hard to describe. And I mean, I
It,
don't know. I don't want to compare it to someone being in battle, but from my friends who've been in the military, what they describe, it's the only other thing I can think of where it's like the most unimaginable, non-normal things, and you have to somehow function as a normal person.
it's, I think that's the perfect description. I had a nurse that I worked with, and she's wonderful. And she was a NICU nurse navigator at the time, but she said these families walk into a war zone, and not
Yeah.
only just because of the trauma that they see, but how they have to interact. And I think your point is such an important one to realize that as the medical team, they can look to dad and be like, okay, dad, you're not the one in active this or that. You're not the one going
Yeah.
through this. So I'm sure you're taking in information at 100%, which is just not true.
Yeah, it's one of the things that dad told me this, and it sticks to me like crazy, that, and I say it all the time, that day and all those days, there's so much information. It's like trying to drink water from a fire hose, and it's just coming at you. But then you're also in that fog of trying to grasp everything that's going on. And so for us, I walk into that room, and she's crying and I'm crying, and they're trying to give her stuff to slow down the process. And for us, and like most things get worse. And so for us, they were trying to slow the delivery, and we found out that the baby was in stress, and she was in distress, and was breech. And so it went from slowing things down to, we're going to have an emergency C-section. And we're like, what? And then it's like, yeah, right now. And so I'm like, oh, okay. And the next thing I know, she's gone. And, I'm telling her it's going to be okay. It's going to be all right. Everything's going to be fine. And then I'm also, trying to text family, members, and, her sister and my parents, and, trying to get people to know what's going on. And, we still have our oldest, at grandma's house, who doesn't
Yeah.
have a clue about anything that's going on. And so there's that moment. And then it's me having to scrub in for surgery. And that was there's like these spots in this whole timeline that are just, you know, giant moments for me. And it's the car ride, it's the phone call, it's the car ride. And then the next one for me was scrubbing in, because I'm handed some scrubs and I'm left alone. And that time alone was one of the darkest moments of my life, because it's even worse than the car ride, because now everything is, you were
Mm.
imagining the worst moments in the car. Now you're actually in the worst moments. And now you're like, okay, not only might I not, I might lose my baby, but I might lose my wife. Like, you know, it's a super dark and scary moment. And so, it's so hard to be strong at that moment.
We'll be right back. This is for all the NICU dads out there. Whether you've been in the NICU previously or you're there now, this challenge is for you. Started by Alex Zavala, who heads the platform The NICU Dad, he's decided this Father's Day to launch a challenge that's all about building strength and resilience for dads who have been in the NICU or are currently in the NICU. NICU dads who have been in the hospital know that they have to carry the invisible strength for their family, their partner, their child, inside and outside of the hospital walls. So Alex wants to bring attention to the amazing strength, resilience, and support that NICU dads show their families every single day. He wants NICU dads and the people who love them to do a 100 push-up challenge. That means that for every day your baby was in the NICU, he wants you to do 100 push-ups. He then posted on social media using the hashtag #PushWithPurpose, hashtag Miracle and Muscles, and hashtag NICU Dad Push-Up Challenge. Engaging in this is an amazing way to show support for NICU dads, but to also bring connection. When we help NICU dads feel seen, they feel validated, they can support one another, and they can often share the invisible load that they carry so much while their families are in the NICU. You don't have to be a dad to engage in this challenge. We want child life specialists, nurses, neonatologists, people who love fathers who have been in the NICU to join in this challenge today. 100 push-ups a day for every day that a baby that you love was in the NICU. That's our goal, to spread awareness about the amazing resilience of NICU dads.
Basically, the doctor came in and was trying to explain to me, what was going to happen in the operating room. And honestly, I couldn't tell you any word that he said, because the entire time I was just concerned with, you know, is my wife going to die? Is my baby
Mm.
going to die? And after he was done finally talking, I told him, and I begged him, I'm like, just please, whatever you do, please don't let me lose my family. And it was just one of the worst moments.
I have kind of a weird question.
Hmm.
Did you trust him? And if so, like what did he do to gain your trust? Or were you just like you had no choice but to trust? Where, when you ask someone to do that for you, how do you feel?
That's a great question, actually. And, you know, I, the weird part is I felt kind of guilty even asking him that or telling him that because, here he was, you know, like business telling me, this is what's going to happen and everything. And, you know, I'm sure he's done it 1,000 times, and seen this situation hundreds of times. But for me, you know, whether I felt like it was somewhat selfish, but, I just couldn't, I had to beg the guy, like, please don't let me lose my family. Like, I had to have him understand, how important they are to me and he put his hand on my shoulder and, he told me like, it's going to be okay. And he's like,
Mm,
I understand. And, that was a pretty strong moment. I, but I also didn't have a choice.
yeah,
I had to
yeah.
put my faith in them and, and that's with the whole situation, whether or not, you know, you have no choice but to put all your faith in everything. I mean, you really, whether you're a religious person or just anything, like, I was begging from anybody and everyone, for help and just, trying to do everything that I can possible to make sure that everything was going to come out okay. And that was also the weight and the severity of the situation for me as a husband, as a dad. I that's all I could do. A lot of dads in this situation, later on, and I mean we'll talk about that later on how dads feel, but that's all I could do at that moment. I was helpless. So the only thing that I could do is to pray, is to get these doctors to please, try your hardest, whatever you need to do, just, that was it. That's all I could do. And now that I think about it, that's probably why I said the things that I did and did what I did. But yeah, I trusted him, but I was also just in a whirlwind and my head was spinning and I still, in the back of my mind, I'm like, this isn't happening. This can't be happening. Like I am stuck in this bad nightmare and just would like,
You're trying to make sense of
yeah,
it. You're trying to be like brain catch up with what's
yeah,
happening in my reality right
yeah.
now.
And in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, just wake up from this nightmare. Like this is not a good dream. And, and there's that fight of no, this is really happening. Like it's really happening. And so we go into the operating room and that there's trauma within that just on the fact of being in there and seeing my wife there on the operating table. And so she finally cried and I'm like, okay, okay, she's all right. And they have her off to the side and they're taking care of her and a nurse, thankfully, she's like, oh, do you have a phone? I'll take pictures. And she took, and we're so grateful she did. And we have those. But once I saw the doctors working on our daughter, my focus was back on my wife. She was losing a lot of blood, and there was blood everywhere on the floor. And I mean, it was
You're
just,
watching this like traumatic event to your loved one happen in front of you.
yeah, yeah. And that kind of starts everything. Oh, I call it the NICU Dad Shuffle. And it's who do I focus on when and who needs me now and and there's some really hard decisions on that. And so I saw that my daughter was with the doctors. And so, okay, she's fine. She's okay for now. Like, there's nothing I can do there. So I need to focus on my wife. And so, I'm talking to her and she's crying, just still in this nightmare for herself. And so they take my daughter to the NICU and they tell me, hey, do you want to come and see her? We're going to, close your wife up and stuff. And so I'm like, okay, so I now leave my wife and with my daughter to the NICU and see them take care of her. And, there's something else that starts in there too, and that's the guilt of being able to spend time with our baby and, see her in those first moments. And while my wife's still in the operating room.
It's reminding me a lot of the choice that we talk about with NICU parents, especially, which is you don't ever get a win, right? You don't get to go home and be with those kids at home because you're always leaving your baby. And then when you're with your baby, you're missing out on what's going on with your kids. And then you're describing that same experience for dads or partners having to choose your wife versus your child. And neither one feels like a good or the best option.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I was going and taking pictures of our daughter and seeing her and talking to her and, just, and that was something within itself, here, this little 2 pound, 5 ounce baby, she was so tiny and, but I got to see the fight in her and, and that kind of, I'm like, oh, she might make it. Like, she's a fighter and, so I told her, I'm like, hey, just keep fighting. Like, we love you so much. And, we're so glad you're here and, just be strong. And then I would go and leave there and I would go see my wife and show her pictures and she was still recovering and, and she hadn't seen our baby, was kind of alone in recovering, and that was a whole different thing with her being by herself and the only thing she was getting was whatever I was relaying. And that happens to a lot of NICU parents, where dad is the one responsible for most of the information and, we're the relayer of everything, even though our heads are still spinning.
Yeah, that's such an important point. Things are lost in translation on a good day, and then on your hardest day, they're even more lost. How did you keep track of it all? How did you handle that information? And I guess even moving forward to the whole NICU stay, what was your process for keeping track of things and being that person for your family?
That's a great question. And the answer is I didn't. I
Yeah,
did as best as
that's a
I
good
could.
answer, by the
You
way.
know, yeah, we went and, that started us going back and forth where I'd go to the baby, I'd go to my wife. And for us in our situation, within 45 minutes of being born, our baby was in a ambulance being transported to a level 4 NICU, about 45 minutes away. So we were in Kyle, Texas, where she was born at, and she was taken to Dell Children's in Austin because she needed a level 4 NICU. She was so small. And so they asked me, they said, hey, do you want to ride behind the ambulance? And, I still to this day cannot believe that I said no. My head was shaking yes, but I knew that I couldn't leave my wife. My wife had nothing, there was no overnight bag. There was, you know, nothing. She was at work and here she's going to have to stay in this hospital and recover. And not to mention, we have our siblings still, our oldest at grandma's house
Yeah.
and, the dog's at home. And so I'm like, no, I can't follow you now. And that's where the decisions come in like this. And so I ended up having to make sure my wife was okay, go home and shower and get stuff for our sibling who that stay at grandma's was now going to be almost lived there. And
Right.
I finally made it up to the NICU that afternoon, and I had never been to the NICU. I didn't know what it was, and so I'm walking into a hospital that I've never been in before. And, it's later on in the afternoon, there's nobody around, and, I had to find my way and go into a place that I've never been before or known about, and I did. And, I stayed there. I spent the night there, and for me, that was my NICU dad shuffle of being in one hospital and then leaving there to go see my wife in another hospital, and then going home and taking care of our oldest and making sure everything was still taken care of. But
Just literally keeping everything afloat and just trying to maintain moment to moment in all three
yeah,
places. And knowing where you live and where Dell is, I know you had lots of driving too,
yeah,
back and
yeah,
forth.
and that's good and bad. A lot of alone time, and so that you're still in this nightmare that doesn't end. And but gradually you get used to it, things get better. My wife, there was no stopping her to get out of that hospital. She almost got out, was released the next day, but she spent 2 nights in the hospital and couldn't walk, but still got out of there, and and came over to Dell. And Dell has they have sleep rooms there, and so we were able to spend a week in those sleep rooms while my wife healed, and we were just down the hall from our baby. And so that was really special and nice, and gave us an opportunity to where we were there at the hospital for that week.
We'll be right back.
If you have ever wondered where you could get those cloth dolls that Child Life Specialists use with kids for medical education or sending home to siblings or to draw on for therapeutic activities, then you don't have to wonder any longer, because our friends at Smile Makers have decided to now sell these amazing cloth dolls for a very affordable price. I know that when I was in the hospital, I would have to rely on a volunteer network to then give us the dolls, which was really nice, but I had to wait a lot of times. Like, I would need a doll now and I wasn't able to get it. So this is a great place to be able to go get your procedure dolls at smilemakers.com. And y'all, they have 3 different skin tones for these cloth procedure dolls. In addition, you can actually buy a procedure doll prep bundle that comes with fabric markers. This is a fabulous way to do your medical teaching, to help siblings feel involved, to get kids creative, to do a lot of teaching about different diagnoses. And so go to smilemakers.com so you can get your cloth dolls as soon as possible before they run out. And when you go to that checkout to get your cloth dolls, also type in on call 20 and you will get 20% off your entire order. So not just the cloth dolls. So if you get a bundle for Child Life Specialists, if you get a piece of furniture, if you get one of their really cool toys and prizes, or you order a large sticker order from them, on call 20 gets you 20% off your whole order. That's smilemakers.com, code ONCALL20 to get 20% off. You mentioned earlier that, you're the NICU dad. You've become an advocate not only for being a NICU parent, but being a NICU father, which is a really specific thing. And you've talked a little bit about the shuffle, but what are some of the lesser known things that you want the general public, other parents to realize what it's like being a NICU dad?
Probably the biggest thing, especially for new NICU dads, aside from the general public, the main thing for me was the understanding, or to get people to realize that the trauma and everything that we go through and the stress sometimes is at a different stage or level of the whole NICU process than moms. What tends to happen, or what we see, is actually dads, on everything that I've been describing so far. This was super stressful and a nightmare and everything, but the the NICU stay was actually pregame. Like, that was the warm up, because once we went home, everything, my stress levels went up, because there were no NICU staff now to lean on and rely on. It was one thing when we were in the NICU, and that stress was incredible, but we also had the amazing doctors and nurses there. Now, once we went home, there were still things that were going on. And, especially those parents that have medically fragile children, you go home and you're it. And especially for dad, I'm now responsible to take care of my wife, take care of, the rest of the kids and the house and work. But also I'm responsible to make sure my wife's emotionally okay, make sure she's not suffering from postpartum, relaying information for our doctors, and there's all the doctor's visits. And, it's a huge amount of stress. And so a lot of folks think, oh, well, once you get out of the NICU, it's fine. You made it. And I'm like, no, it actually gets harder. And so what I wish I would have done was taking better care of myself in the NICU. And what I try to get folks to understand now is, or especially NICU dads, is you want to be your best self when you do go home. We were zombies, and we didn't sleep, we didn't eat right. And, so when we went home, I was a shell of myself. And that's not what my wife needed. That's not what my family needed. And but that's one of my main things.
What has it been like sharing this story for you and giving that specific advice to other NICU dads? I'm sure I think you're exactly right. And we focus a lot on NICU moms, as we should. But this NICU dad component, and where you're the one, it's secondary trauma. I mean, and it's your own trauma. It's first degree trauma that you're experiencing. So what has it been like sharing this with other NICU dads who are going through it?
It's been incredible. It's been life-changing for me. There's so many things that we go through where we think it's just us and nobody would understand. And then what you see is, sharing our experience, you realize, oh my God, there's so many of us out there. And not only is there so many of us out there, but there's so many of us, our stories are ours, and but there's a commonality to it all too, that we all have and that we all share. And I always feel better talking to a NICU family or a NICU dad and sharing our experiences. And then, you realize, wow, okay, I'm not by myself. There's other dads, but then there's also that component of, oh, wow, there's so many people that we can help and educate. And, I've been fortunate enough to talk to a lot of medical professionals and seeing them when their eyes light up with the perspective that they haven't taken into account before. And it's kind of sad that, it's 2022 and, these conversations are barely being had now. But, things have changed. And I tell folks all the time, I'm like, dads used to not even be in the delivery room. And, and now you have dads who stay home to take care of the kids and, and want to be involved. And
Well, I have one last question for you. And then, of course, everybody's going to go check out the NICU Dad podcast. But if you can tell us one thing that your daughter, being born at 27 weeks, that little fighter that you described, has taught you about yourself, what would that be?
Oh boy, it's pretty easy, and that's it. You can do anything. Anything is possible. It's, even just being in the NICU and being a NICU parent, for us going through that experience with her, there's nothing that we can't do. And, it always blows our mind when we say it's one of the worst things that's ever happened to us, but it also is one of the best things that ever happened to us, because, we'll know we survived that and she survived that. There's nothing that we can't do.
That's so beautiful. She's a pretty amazing kid. And it sounds like you have an awesome wife too, and that they're very lucky to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, Alex, if people want to, learn more about you, follow along with you and listen to your podcast, how can they do that?
So yeah, we were able to start the NICU Dad now as a nonprofit. For years, we've been involved in our NICU, and we do holiday bags and have done stuff for the NICU staff. And now everything just kind of has seemed to grow a little bit. But we just started the NICU Dad nonprofit, focusing on NICU Dad support. But there are a bunch of organizations that are offering peer-to-peer mentoring, especially for dads and NICU parents. Hand to Hold is a great organization that is doing that. I also host the NICU Dad Discussions podcast. It's one of Hand to Hold's podcasts, and you can check that out anywhere that you can find your local podcasts. And there's a bunch of other NICU parent and NICU focused podcasts, but it's the NICU Dad Discussions podcast. But also on all social medias, just look for the NICU Dad. You can Google the NICU Dad. We have Facebook groups, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and yeah, there's a lot of support now that we're trying to put out there. And also you can go to the NICUDad.com. That's really where everything started for me. It was a blog that I did.
I love that. I'm a big fan of anything Hand to Hold. So if you haven't heard of them before, go check them out. And I love that you're working with them because they're an incredible organization and you're such an important dad. And I really appreciate you speaking so vulnerably about what it was like for you, because it's really important for us to all hear and learn from and feel validated by as parents. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Child Life On Call podcast. The only reason this podcast keeps on going is because of you and listeners like you. So please join in on the conversation with us on Instagram, Facebook. I'm even on TikTok now, y'all, making a fool of myself. I haven't danced yet, but maybe it's coming. You can find us at Child Life On Call. We also have a website, and that has all of our information about the Child Life Circle, about the Child Life On Call app, and a blog with new information all the time. That's childlifeoncall.com. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart for listening to these episodes and being a part of this community. We are so grateful and so honored to be able to provide this for you.
For those of you who are joining us today, I am not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I am a child life specialist. And the suggestions and tips and resources that I talk about with parents on this podcast may be great for you and they may not be right for you. So the most important person you can talk to about getting support is your care team, your doctor who knows your story and your child's story. So regardless of maybe what I mention or what other families mention here, we're not licensed therapists, we're not doctors. We're having a conversation about what the parenting journey has been like. So please keep that in mind as you listen today.